Hello and welcome to episode 158 of Retro Power and Cut. It is unusually me starting the video because Nat's not feeling very well today, so he's not here, which means I've got to do the whole thing. So excuse me if I kind of miss things or duplicate things that have already been done. It's quite a lot to remember, particularly as I've not been overly on top of what's going on in here. However, we're going to start with Churchill. Tom's at the back here, enjoying some more lead work, which is an ongoing theme. Which we won't go into again at the minute, just because it's a continuation of what's already been discussed. Stu's been carrying on with the cooling system, so he's basically in the very latter stages of dry build on this, getting everything kind of mechanically built while it's at bare metal so we don't miss anything. I think Nat mentioned last week, he was talking about cooling systems and the plan we had. Concept Racing have now fabricated this. I'm pointing here because it's behind the headlight, not because I'm mistaking a headlight aperture for a tank, but Concept Racing have now fabricated us a very nice little expansion overflow tank with a kind of a dip tube in it to the bottom. So Stu's been cracking on with making a bracket for that, which he's done a very nice job of indeed. And basically finishing off laying out the coolant plumbing, which is kind of a hybrid of XJS factory pipes where there's complicated junctions and then some aluminium joiners we've done between. It's just running the heater plumbing at the minute and working out how that's going to clip under the inlet manifold. And I think one of the few remaining jobs in here is just doing the clipping points for the air conditioning refrigerant lines. And then we're pretty close to being able to take the engine out. There's a few little remaining jobs that need the engine out, but everything's still built. So some of the earth points where we've marked that, there was some mounting bosses for the power steering lines, etc. And then we're going to be going through the process of basically listing everything parts wise, so we can start getting down what processes need doing to those parts, whether there needs modifications to those parts, whether those parts need ordering, starting to gear up for the final build essentially, so that goes reasonably smoothly. So that's one of the next things. Going back to bodywork, to enable us to complete that, Luke's been doing some work. So the grille is going to be a custom grille, which is only going to be a simple surround with a mesh in it, which sounds relatively straightforward. However, we still have to make the decision on how we're going to actually make that. The original surround is kind of basically like I think it's a T-shaped aluminium extrusion, which is just kind of bent to the shape and then has vertical slats welded into it, or brazed into it possibly. If we take all the slats out, the shape of that is not really conducive to a nice job of putting mesh in there. So what we want to do is make our own surround that is a little bit chunkier on the return edge leading into here, and we'll create a flat plane with the back of that and have a flat section of mesh mounted to the back of that. And as with all the trim on this, it's going to be copper plated, which throws just an added sort of complication into the mix. And there's also these intakes down here which are going to be our own design, and again there'll be copper plated bezels on them. So with this, because I want to have something to put in the hole so that the guys can do the lead work around it, because the bodies on these Jags were always a little bit, you know, any which way, and the grills were just kind of tweaked to fit. And I want to sort of start with something that's a known, symmetrical, defined shape, and then tweak the body to match it, which kind of brings us on to whether we do a prototype grill or whether we actually go straight in with making the final grill. And then the way we're going to go about that, and it's been a bit of a thought process on that. I mean, we could machine the entire surround from a billet of aluminium, which is pretty wasteful because obviously you're just machining away the vast bulk of it. And it's also not that easy. It is possible, but it's not very straightforward to copper plate aluminium. We could machine the whole thing out of brass, which would work perfectly in terms of copper plating it, but a slab of brass big enough to machine that from would be extraordinarily expensive, and it would be incredibly wasteful as well, because most of it would just be machined away. So then we were on to potential kind of additive methods, and that it links into something we saw when Nat and I did a trip to Autodesk, it must be a few weeks ago now, and they had a machine by a company called Meltio, which is basically an additive metal 3D printer, but instead of being the sort of older type machine you think of when you think of a metal 3D printer, which is basically laser sintering, so it uses a metal powder. It's actually wire fed, so it's sort of like a MIG welder with a wire feed, only it has a laser creating the heat rather than an electrical arc. So it's much more controlled. And then that machine itself is mounted within a Haas machining centre. So the beauty of that is you can basically give it a shape, and it'll build up the shape of the object with weld bigger than it needs to be, and then to get the accuracy, use the machining sensor to machine it to the exact shape. But consequently, you're not wasting a massive amount of material by starting with a big cube shape that's bigger than the part you're making. So we're contemplating doing it with that. The other potential way we'd do it was cast. Now, to do it cast, we'd need to machine the shape out of something like an epoxy tooling block, and then use that to create a sand cast mould, and then actually cast it in molten brass and then copper plate it. Which, there are sort of accuracy things potentially in the surface finish there, which might not be ideal. You can certainly get them extremely good. It's just probably more labour intensive in the plating to get the surface finish how we want it. So we'll watch this space on this. At the moment, my sort of focus is making a prototype, and we're just deciding whether to 3D print the prototype or whether to go straight into machining it from epoxy if we're going to go down the casting route. So we should be making that decision in the next couple of days, because I need to get this piece made so then they can finish the lead work at the front. And it's a similar story in terms of needing the pieces to finish the body here, but they are only small, so machining those from billet brass would be no problem on those. So Luke's basically done the design work for the grille and for these air intakes, and we're just in the process of working out the most economical and best quality way of making the grille. So that's where we're at with that. Redux number 4. Scott's on with the arch shaping, so he's been on generally with getting all of the bodywork, the carbon bodywork in place, so we can do all the underlying metalwork changes. And then with the quarters pinned in place in the right position, you can then work on the arch metalwork to bring the arch tub out to the widened shape, because they're quite different in their shapes. The arch aperture itself is higher up the body than standard, the flare is wider, and it's a different angle. There's a lot of shape changes, so the actual arch tub is significantly wider, and it comes out to meet that. So he's just in the process of getting those made. So I can see one's actually attached to the car now, looks to be 80% through progress, and then I think he's just starting the next one down there, which is what that piece he's got there is. E-type. So Sam has been working on seat mounting. Now he's got all that tunnel structure in, got the shifter in its sort of recess, got the cable all in place. We wanted to have another trial sit. We've been trying to get the seats as low as we possibly can. I think Nat talked about this before, because we're doing like a roll bar on this, which will be a temporary support for a canvas roof, which will just be an emergency measure if it rains. But the gist is that with that out of the way, it will look just like an open top roadster, no sign of any soft top there. And it's already difficult to get a driver looking low in an E-type, but when you add in that roll bar and get it to the height where it looks visually pleasing, you need to really get the driver as low as possible. So we've done a revision on the seat mounts for the MX-5 seats that we're trialling to get that as low as possible. But then as a bit of a sanity check, the chap we're building it for wanted to come over, sit in that again, make sure he was happy with that, and also gave us the opportunity to get an exact measurement to his head with him sitting in the car, rather than us kind of guesstimating from ourselves. But we also thought we'd put a standard E-type seat back in, also as low as it would go, just to kind of prove out the gain we're getting from the MX-5 seat, which I think is pretty substantial. The fundamental change is that the base of the seat drops down between the runners. So your bum basically versus the runner sits a lot lower. And because the seats sit at an angle, and it's a good thing that we've got them mounted at an angle, because that's beneficial, weirdly, in terms of height, because you can recline the seat more and sit further forward, but because your knees are bent up slightly more, it means that your pedals don't feel like they're too close. So we're just basically getting that in at the lowest possible point, and because of that's what I was getting at, is because of the angle of the seat, when you slide it back, you get into a position where the runners slide into the floor fairly soon. So having the base as low as it can be versus the runners is fairly critical. So I'm pretty sure the prove out, having sat in it myself, is that it's definitely worth going for the MX-5 seat, and we can certainly work on the cosmetics of the seat to change the way it looks, but the construction of the base and the runners is really, really space efficient. So in mindful of the fact the owner's coming over to sort of do that trial, we're going to get the pedals back in, the steering column back in, and then we can actually pick up where we were quite a while ago on it, in terms of doing the pedal mounting. So we've already redesigned the pedal box months and months ago, very many episodes ago. The throttle pedal, we're going a BMW E46 pedal because it's going fly-by-wire throttle. But we never did the mounts for that. It was kind of resting in there when the owner did his first trial sitting. So we're going to work on actually getting the mounts properly done for that, and finishing off the steering column mounting, because again, it was mounted in there, but in a relatively rough and ready fashion that still needed some refinement. So that's that. Allegros, quite cool with them directly side by side. I haven't seen them like that previously. Bobby's been finishing off radiator pack and related things. So I think he was working on this top slam panel area last week. The idea being that we want to make something that looks cosmetically nice and finishes off the radiator and AC condenser, so when you're looking sort of into the engine bay from above, it looks reasonably nicely finished there, but also combine the mounting of those into that. And we came up with this idea of doing the punched and swaged holes, and then there'll be pegs on top of the radiator here and on top of the condenser shroud and fan mount on this side, which sit into rubber grommets inside those same swaged holes. So it's just the mounts are a continuation visually of everything else, and that's looking really good. So that Bobby then moved on to just sorting out how the pipework's going to sit exactly. We're actually going to be able to use the original Integra hoses. Obviously we'll buy new ones, but the original shaped hoses, just slightly shortened. So he's set the position of the top hose here. I mean, this radiator is just for mock-up purposes, so it's just tacked on at the minute. He's set the position of the bottom hose. At the moment, the neck's just off the radiator, but we'll be doing a neck that comes off the back and up, probably sits here somewhere, which I think will then complete all of the mock-up on that radiator. And then we'll be able to send off that whole cooler pack to Concept Racing, who'll do us a more pleasingly fabricated version of that radiator, because we just bought a cheapo Civic radiator, I think it is, just for mock-up. He's also been working on the bonnet catch. This kind of whole area has been refabricated to try and get the fans in, the cooler pack in, still allow us to get airflow in there. So getting some structure back in where there used to be a rib up the centre here was something we wanted to do. So there's a brace to the front here, but then also where the bonnet latch goes, he's done quite a nice fabricated piece that not only supports the slam panel off this central rib, but it also has the tube in it for the throttle cable. Throttle cable right here, that's strange. Bonnet release cable, and the hole for the spring that springs the latch shut on there as well. So quite a neat self-contained job of that. And then Luke has been working on these lower vents. So he'd already designed the sort of cosmetic part of this, but now with all the revisions to the inner structure, which has essentially been removed to allow airflow, what we wanted to do was maximise the amount of airflow through the radiators by specifically ducting these intakes to it as well. So he's been working on a back shell piece which will go on the back of these vents and duct the air to the side, and it'll basically sit up against the side of the radiator and the side of the condenser housing there, and force any air that goes in through there up and through the radiators as well. So the total area we're going to get in terms of airflow is pretty substantial when you put together all that, those and the two intakes there. So hopefully be all good on cooling. And then he's just been making a start on doing exactly the same on this one. So that's kind of most of the rest of the metalwork on this is now at the same stage as this. Oh, actually no, it's the other way around thinking about it. This was actually the first one we worked on. So the metalwork on this is basically at the stage this one is, but we hadn't done all the cooler pack modifications. So it's just taking the time now to do all those cooler pack modifications on this one. And then he's got a bit of continuation of metalwork on the inner wing structure here to do on this one, but whilst it's fresh in his mind, good idea to duplicate the work that he'd just done on this one, so it's clear in his mind and not lost by the depths of time. So that's that. They've been working on the Chevette in here, so I think, was it just painted last week? So yes, rapid progress really on flatting and polishing work, and it is looking pretty darn good, I have to say. I think they're basically done on that now. They've got to do the satin black in the sort of grill aperture at the front, if you like. I've just dropped a text to the guy we're doing it for, just to make sure he does want us to do that. But I think at that point, that is basically ready for handover. And then we've got the jeopardy of the pinstripes on the Escort. I'm still toing and froing on colour samples. We did a spray out of the stripes. The client wasn't totally sure on the reddy orange colour, so we've done another one, which is going to be wending its way to him today, and then hopefully sometime imminently, I would imagine early next week, we'll have a final decision on that, and we can actually get this scary bum clenching time of doing the stripes and getting the final lacquer over that, which will tie in well, because it'll mean that that can then come through here, and we can start the build on that, which should fairly rapidly get to the same stage that Project 1 is at. So I'll tell you what, I'll pause briefly on Stratos. We've been doing more testing in this, so Alex has been working through the mapping essentially, trying to get it refined. I think I mentioned previously, it's the big headache with it is the large fly-by-wire throttle and trying to get a stable idle control on it. But he has made huge progress on that now. Also quite a lot of work gone into how drivable it is in traffic. So sort of making sure that when the revs start to drop, it compensates a little bit. So when you're trying to pull off, it's quite a light flywheel, it make it less easy to stall it, anti-stall I suppose you'd call it. Working on that, working on the sensitivity of the throttle. So because it's fly-by-wire, obviously you can map how much a change in pedal angle affects the opening of the throttle. And it was a little bit lively before. I mean, it was great when you were driving it in a sporty fashion, but it had a tendency to be, if you were pulling off, it'd kind of bog a little bit, and then you'd give it more, and it would suddenly go the opposite direction. So we've been sort of ironing out those things and making it a lot more drivable. And I'd say we're extremely close now. And it's been going through a bit of work on the dash display as well, changing the way some of that's displayed, changing the colours to make it more in keeping with the rest of the car. We've been going through the fuel gauge programming to just dampen that down a bit because it was fluctuating around quite a lot. Just doing refinements essentially to make everything more pleasing, more accurate, and the driving experience a bit more pleasurable. And then the guys have just been repainting this front. I think I said last week that they'd repainted this panel, and I wasn't totally happy with it, so they've redone that, which is about ready to go on now as well, I think. So yeah, we're getting extremely close on this. I think a bit more driving, and then just a few tiny cosmetic tidy up bits, and it should be ready for final detail. Speaking of which, the Morris has completed its final detail. In fact, it would be coming back today, but I've delayed it because it's only just down the road. I'm using an open transporter to bring it, but I don't want to bring it in the rain, and it's absolutely pouring with rain. So hopefully that will be back with us tomorrow, and then it's basically getting the rear wings sprayed PPF that we're going to be doing, which we'll probably show you next week. Rear wings on, and then that's ready to go. Right, going back to Project 1, which I just briefly mentioned. We have received the engine, which is an exciting moment. So Sherwood is building us two 2.1 litre BDG engines for this and Project Kuma. The first one's now arrived. So they are available all new, because Sherwood has now had all the parts remachined, recast, etc. You don't need a donor engine, you can literally just order a brand new complete engine. And we had a discussion very early on in this project. Actually, there was a discussion back and forth, do we do Duratec again, do we do Vauxhall red top, do we do BD, and there was kind of, they all have strengths and weaknesses. I mean, the Vauxhall is a very good engine performance-wise. It's reasonably compact, so it ticks a lot of boxes. The Duratec's a little bit bulkier. I don't think it sounds as good. And then that, with the tipping point really with the BD was the noise. So, I mean, one thing is it's a nice nod to it being a Mark 1 Escort. These obviously being kind of what was in, a more basic version of this was what was in the RS 1600. But they sound absolutely incredible. So the sort of clincher was the sound after, with the client kind of listening to lots of videos of different performance engines, we were like, yeah, let's just go with the BD. So yeah, that's what's going in. We've already got everything, because we had a dummy engine, everything kind of transmission-wise was ready to go. There was just one remaining job, which is we wanted to make a stone shield that sits between the gearbox and the engine and basically blocks off the opening that sort of leads to the flywheel at the bottom. So Adam's just been quickly doing a CAD drawing for that. He's machined a steel one. There's one sitting there. I don't know if that's he did one as a first go and wanted to tweak a few bits. I don't know if that's the tweaked one or not, but basically we'll be cutting 2 of those, getting them Xylan coated, and then as soon as we've got those done, engine and box can go together and they can go in, which is exciting because that then opens up quite a few things on this. Anthony's already been looking at the fuel plumbing and got a lot of that in place. But it'll open up so much more because once the engine's in, very quickly we can get the exhaust system in because that's already been made. We can get the remainder of the fuel system done in the engine bay. We can finish up the measurements for the engine wiring harness because at the moment, well, obviously we've got the plan in terms of what's going to be there and how it goes to a bulkhead connector, but we haven't done the final lengths, which then means Alex can make the engine harness. And yeah, well, things can take shape quickly. We'll measure up for the prop once that's in, get the prop shaft in, and actually mechanically at that point it's pretty much there. The dry sump tanks I think we showed being finished last week, they're ready to go for anodising. We're just waiting for a couple more parts that are being machined at the minute. So the pedal arms, as soon as they're here, we've got a good old batch of black anodising to go, so that lot's all going to go together. And yeah, things will start to take shape pretty rapidly. And as I say, when Kuma comes in here after we've done the pinstripes, we'll be in a position to get it to the same stage of this pretty quickly. Just trying to think what else we've been on with on this. Luke has been looking at the engine, the cam cover. So we've always planned to do our own cam cover on this, primarily to mount coil on plug units because we wanted to run it coil on plug, but also it'll have a sort of top cover piece which hides the wiring to the coil on plug units just to tidy it up, and it also gives us a routing where we can route the wiring to the sensors that are near the front of the engine in at the back under the cover and then just branch them out behind the cam pulley and down to the sensors, so it makes the sensor wiring routing a little bit tidier as well. So Luke's basically finished. I gave him a couple of last little pointers on a few little details I needed changing last night, but I think he'll have done them already this morning. So that's ready to be sent away for machining, that model now. So it'd be really cool to see those come through. And was there something else he was on with on this? There's something else that's come through. I mentioned it last week. We were getting the door cards done. So they are now here. So these are 3mm thick black ABS. Luke did the drawing for these from a scan of the door, and then Bruce Holder has laser cut them out for me. Speaking of Bruce Holder, he is also the man behind Octane Legends. So the artworks you see around the place are available as desk artwork in our shop at the moment. We will also hopefully be offering them as banners like this, so you can put one in your garage if you wanted to. And Bruce does do custom pieces as well. So if you go onto his Instagram or Facebook, which is Octane Legends, you can get in touch with him and he can do a custom piece of your own car as well. So yes, door cards looking good. I've given them a hold up. I haven't fully clipped them in place, but they look good from holding them up. So hopefully we'll be able to get them off to be leathered as well very soon. And the bulkhead and rear parcel shell panels are going to be cut soon as well. So that's that. Camaro. So we are back on with Camaro, and Anthony has been doing a couple of different prongs of action on this. So one was just getting back onto the grille area, which is kind of where he was last time he was working on this car, buttoning up all of the grille installation, and the headlight surrounds, and essentially finishing off that front end. I think as it stands here, it's just the badge to go on, which needs anodising, and then the guys are just starting to prep and paint the central panel that sits down here and sort of cosmetically finishes the engine bay off. Had been painted already. They're doing it again because I threw it on the floor in a most amusing fashion, because I was literally telling somebody that satin lacquer is a bit of a pain because if you get any scratches in it, you can't just polish them out. And as I said that, I dropped it on the floor. And then he's moved on to seals and glass. So he'd kind of done the window lifter and latch mechanisms before. We were waiting on the seal set, which UPS lost. And then it's actually having a remarkable amount at the minute. We went through a phase of UPS losing a huge number of our parcels, and they would almost always be signed for Amazon. And there is a massive Amazon warehouse down the road, but of course we didn't really have much joy trying to get stuff back from there. And then recently we've had a spate of the things that went missing a very long time ago suddenly turning up. So on this I ordered another seal set because the first set went missing, and then yesterday, which is about 3 months after I ordered them, or after they got lost, they randomly got delivered. So I have 2 seal sets for this now. But yeah, Anthony's on with fitting the window seal channels around here, the blowout clips as they call them, getting the seals in, and the trims that sit just on the inner ledge of the body, scraper seals if you like, and just getting towards getting the glass fully in. I don't think there's a lot standing in our way on that at the minute, so we should be able to get it all the side glazing in. Front and rear screens we're going to hold fire at the minute. It's easier to work on things like the headlining with those out, but it won't be too long until we can get the headlining in, get it fully glazed, and then we have got the engine wiring now from SpearTech, so getting that laid out and installed will be probably the next step. And then the only sort of big job remaining on it, famous last words, but is the main chassis wiring loom for it. So really excited to be back on with this and see it coming together. It's been one of the longer term projects, but it's a stunning car. E-Type, I'll just go around this way, but James has been looking at power steering. I think I mentioned he was just starting to look at sort of finishing off the cooling system plumbing and the power steering plumbing. And as is the way with the whole of this engine bay, we've been trying to keep it looking really classic. And one of the things we wanted to do a little bit better was the power steering. So it's got essentially a rack and pinion hydraulic power steering kit, which is a forward steering rack with custom track rods on it. And it comes with what looks to me like a GM pump and then a ZF reservoir, which is relatively inoffensive. It's a round plastic black reservoir. In fact, it's the same type I'm using on Churchill. But on this, with everything else looking so period and classic, we wanted to have something a little bit more in keeping in terms of the reservoir, and Adam came up with the idea of using a Mark II Jag one, which is actually a pretty good idea. So he's got hold of a used one, and the good thing about this is you can completely disassemble it all. You can still get the filters that sit in here new, and it's got threaded ports on it, which were originally push-on spigots on the bottom of here, but our return to the reservoir will want to be threaded, which again is great because we can just get a male-to-male adapter to go into the return and adapt it to our threaded AN type lines. This will be blast up really nicely. We'll blast and paint that. The plated parts can be replated. And it gives us a really nice classic looking power steering fluid reservoir. So James is just in the process of sussing out the bracket for that. It's going to sit somewhere down here essentially, mounted off the front of the sort of footwell area. So I think that will be a really nice finishing touch to the power steering system. And then yeah, we're just going to carry on going through the engine bay bits where we'd got to. Alternator mounting, that's already been planned. We need to get the belts in place. The AC compressor, we haven't done the bracketry for that yet, so there'll be an AC compressor sitting on this side. So we've got to do the bracket design and fabrication for the AC, get all the belt run sorted for that. We're going to put a tensioner potentially in that belt run as well, rather than having the adjustment on the compressor. So that's really going to be the next phase, is finishing off the remaining power steering plumbing, the last bits of the expansion and coolant plumbing, and then look at the AC compressor mounting, and then the AC plumbing. So good to see this kind of back in the running. Land Cruiser, very happy to say, we brimmed it with fuel at the beginning of the weekend, and Monday morning opened the door, had all the glass up, opened the door Monday morning, no fuel smell. And I've been sort of periodically opening the door and sticking my nose in there, and I can't smell anything. So I'm pretty happy to say that the fuel smell permeation issues we were having with the fuel fill hoses have been solved by the Viton lined hose that Goodflex made up for us. So that has allowed Gibbo now to start buttoning up the interior. So it's getting the seats all back in. We'll get all that lot in, and then tomorrow I've got Dave Rowe coming over to just do some tweaks on the mapping. If you remember, we found a little bit of an air leak around a couple of the injector seals, and I suspect it's now, because we've solved that, it'll now be running a little bit richer. So we just want to go over the map and just make sure we're happy with that. And then I think that is also ready to go. So pretty positive on all fronts. And on that note, I'm going to hope that I've not missed anything, and we'll see you next week. That's a wrap, viewers.